Hello, everyone. Welcome to another Tuesday night Eventide stream. I am your host and creator, Jason Bullman. Hi there, how you doing? Welcome to story time. That's what we're doing here today. Tonight's session is a bit just some playtest feedback, some learning, and some anecdotes. It's mostly here for fun. Figured I'd give you all an insight into the kind of zaniness that I've been experiencing in my home groups as they playtest through Wolfren's Fate. Wolfren's Fate is coming along well. Off alignment. There we go. That's better. I was like, why am I off center? Oh, the camera's tilted. So, Wolfren's Fate, the first part is, I'm getting real close to being done. I've got maybe another 1,000 words or so to write and a bit more to play test, and then it'll be done. And I'll package it together with the first part, and, or rather, I'll probably give you the second part separate. And then later, once I can get an editor on board, and I'm still trying to negotiate that, because it's been a busy time, as soon as I get an editor on board and I make some final playtest adjustments, I'll be packaging that up and releasing it actually as a for sale PDF. So that should be a lot of fun. Those of you who are here will either get it for free or half off at the very least. So, should be a good time. Yeah. Wolfren's Fate's been coming along. I want to show you guys some things I've been developing on the maps here. I've been building more and more pieces. All of these pieces will be available with part 2 for those of you using blue tiles. Even if you're not using blue tiles, they'll be incorporated into the maps that you get as part of the adventure, so that'll be fun and fine. But I have been working on some new bits and pieces here. So I want to kind of take you over to the map here. Let me go ahead and pop over to this. Alright, so here we are in the map. There are, of course, there's the weird creepy symbol. I realized I didn't have just kind of a scroll or letter piece, so I've built one of those, so that is pretty cool. I also did the kind of slice of wood for one of the relics in this room. I'm also really happy with the book piles. There are now book piles that you can throw around, and some of these are individual books. There's a couple loose kind of floating books, and then there's some book piles for you to scatter around the library here and upstairs. I may go back for the final and redo the first floor library map and include some of these book piles and stuff so they're a little bit more accurate. So I did some of those. I have also created an alchemy setup. And this is all just one giant piece. So let me play around with this. Yeah, see, this is just one giant piece that's like an alchemy table. And so that's kind of fun. Here, let me in line with the table. That looks good. There we go. Might as well fix it while I'm here. So I've created that, and then, of course, there's this giant piece that is really kind of a set piece for this encounter, which is the vat and overflow barrel, which is where the oozes emerge from as this encounter progresses. So last week we talked about building an encounter. This is the encounter I've been building. So I've done some drawings for it. I've kind of finalized some things, including you've got the vat system where the two oozes come from, and you've got a green slime that comes out first, and that comes out of the bigger vat, and then you've got a sewer ooze that comes out later. So these tile pieces will be made available to everybody here. Folks who buy the final release will just get these as part of the map. They'll be set and placed, but that's just fine. And of course, we still do have the super cool animation here that I can't wait to show my players there. I don't know that they'll care that much, but I'm really happy with it. So, yeah, there's that. I'm gonna go ahead and get this so I can pause it at the right spot here. And then stop looping. So there you go. Easy to use. So yeah, there's all of that. And of course, this encounter also had a puzzle that we talked about last week. Currently, this is the one I'm going to be playtesting my players through. It looks a lot like this. where the players have to solve an alchemy puzzle by figuring out the right number of reagents to use of various types. There is a text blurb to go with this, but I'm currently refining it. Here, I'll read it. None of my players have had to experience this yet, but let me see if I can pull it up. I've got it here somewhere easily accessible. There it is. So the current puzzle is there's a formula that requires a mixture of iron shavings and Draco acidus, reducing them into ferro ashes. They must then place pure water and apply igno elementum to divide the volume and create aquanigium. Reacting agronigium in the ferro ashes multiplies their power and creates the first part of the solvent. This must be applied in equal portion to Havrum solution, which is made by adding together powdered verdricite and oil of agronam. And all of these are ingredients that they'll be able to find. But this is the trick. The perfect ratio must be maintained. Each element is used in a different ratio from 1 to 9, and the math must all add up. So it's ridiculous. I'm still massaging that text. I'm not fully happy. That's where we're at. Yeah, I'm playing around with stuff. It's ridiculous, but it should be a lot of fun. We're gonna see if they can solve the math puzzle. To be honest, the text for it is really less important than the diagram that the adventure will contain. Yeah, making players do algebra is my favorite form of trap in an adventure. Do math. Solve for X. Yeah, no, it's cruel. Cruel and unusual. But I think this is one that... The upside to this puzzle is that it is one that you can solve by brute force. Because there really is only a few ways to solve it. And trial and error will get you there. Right? So it's not an impossible problem. It just requires you to identify the first row that you should tackle, which is the multiplication row. Because that's the one that's the hardest to solve for, because it has the fewest things that can go in there. So yeah, I think it's going to work out great. I'm excited for it. But we'll see how it goes. So there's that. But here's where we're at. Both groups have now made it up to that room. One of my groups has actually started the fight in that room with the first ooze. The other group is about to go down there. So they're at the same point now. I did have one group miss a session, but we did a longer second session, and they were kind of ahead anyway. So it all came out in the wash. So that is where they're at. So, boy... Playing this part of the adventure has been interesting because there's a bit of a tone shift with part 2, in that it's a little spookier, right? You know, there's something hunting you. It's a little creepier. It's a little darker. There's not other groups running around doing kind of they're not doing other hijinks. There's nothing to worry about with them. This is kind of just pure, like, you're on your own, dungeon exploring. You don't have backup. You don't have people who are going to come save you. You are your own. So, dangerous, fun. And both groups kind of approached it with similar caution, I would say. That's not really a surprise considering who's in it, but, you know, both groups kind of approached it with some caution. In that first room... The room with the 4 displays. Both groups were pretty cautious about it. I did have one group where one player was just like, well, I just go up and try and punch the glass. I try and get it out of the way. And that led to a lot of damage. So they quickly learned not to take this place lightly. But they all kind of looked at all the displays. They found a few trinkets and magic items and things that they could take with them. But mostly... Both groups were pretty concerned about the symbol on the floor because it's weird and it stands out. And that's kind of the point, right? And both groups started to realize that it was reducing, that it was vanishing the moment they came near it. So both groups are kind of hesitant about the whole thing, but obviously it didn't have any immediate effect, so they just kind of shrugged. the shadow implications of the symbol were figured out by both parties, because both parties have a penumbra, so they kind of figured that out pretty easily. But that's what led to kind of the fun, because both groups had a break, either a session break or a mid-game break, right at the point where they crossed over into the second room and the cave fisher snagged somebody. And that's why I called this one Fishing for Heroes, because in both of them, I fished somebody and pulled them towards the corner to eat them, and both groups reacted in abject horror, assuming that player was doomed. Boy, they really turned on a dime on that one and just assumed it was super deadly. Cave Fisher's only a level 1 monster, but, you know, yanking a character and pull him away from the others can cause some initial kind of panic. So that is what I saw with both groups. Both groups kind of panicked and started doing whatever they could to try and, they cut the line. One group cut the line, and the other group acrobatics out of the kind of grab and ripped it off. But I will say this. The Cave Fisher actually ended up being kind of dangerous, just because its claw does a lot of damage for first level characters, right? So, a bad roll on a D10 plus 5, when a first level character takes 14 points of damage and they may already have a little floating, boy, that really hurts. Both groups are relying very heavily on medicine, and they just don't have enough healing in either group. And as a result, after every fight, they tend to take time to heal people up, and then they make sure they go really slow on each encounter to make sure that they have more resources for the next encounter and that they can heal again. But it's probably not helping that, in both groups, like, the best medicine check is like a 5 or a 6. That's... They just don't have characters with super high wisdom to have high medicine scores. One group even has a cleric, but it's a war priest, so they don't have a maxed out wisdom. It's kind of funny watching them kind of stutter step through this thing, because they enter an encounter, they face that encounter, and then they have to stop and figure out how to heal, and oftentimes they have kind of an incomplete heal between encounters. This is the challenge with first level characters, right? They just don't have all the resources and staying power. So there's been more than one occasion in this where they've been like, well, maybe we should go back, right? We should rest already. We've had 2 fights, but those kind of beat us up. Both groups kind of had some of that. Ooh. So, that has been their big challenge going forward. And I think for both groups, they've been kind of cautiously absorbing the lore, but they don't really know what to think of it. Right now, it's just Wolfren's eccentric collection. Aside from that, it's pretty much just even going. So both groups had some trouble with the Cave Fisher. I will say that one group in particular, they have a barbarian in the group, and that barbarian just cleans up. So the barbarian has just been utterly crushing things, and I may only have 30 hit points, but I can't take 2 hits from a barbarian, right? That's too much. So the Cave Fisher died pretty easy to them. I think in the group that played last night, the Cave Fisher, there was serious concern that it was that it was going to kill someone. I had one character unconscious. I think at this point in time, throughout the first 5 or 6 sessions, both groups have had someone unconscious once or twice. So not too bad, not too deadly. No one's come close to death. In that no one's been at like dying 2 or dying 3. They always manage to get them stabilized or back up within a round, but they're burning through resources that they don't have a lot of. So it's funny. The kind of the moment that both groups knew that they were in some trouble was just that moment that line came out of the darkness instead of pulling them in. And the other thing that I think is funny is that both groups kind of ignored the giant patch of mold until somebody got too close to it and took cold damage, right? And then all of a sudden it was like, oh no, because very few people in either group have much in the way of nature. So both groups kind of panicked and fled. Fortunately for them, neither group reacted by throwing fire at it. One of the groups nearly did. The first group nearly did. They have an alchemist in that group, and the alchemist was like, well, I'll just firebomb it. Right? It clearly does cold damage, so fire will take care of it. If you know brown mold, that is the opposite, right? It's dealing cold damage because it is drawing the heat out of you, and it wants heat. Throwing alchemist fire at it is a good way to end up with a brown mold that is twice as big, which is, not going to be good, because then it's going to make it really hard to get through the dungeon. I should include a sidebar. That's a good reminder. It's just I was talking through that. I should include a sidebar about what to do if the brown mold expands, because it is kind of blocking the terrain, and if it expands, then you have no choice but to kind of navigate it to get to the stairs to go down. So there's that. I think after that, both groups kind of did exactly what the pathing told them to do. They went, instead of dealing with the mold, they went north to come back south around the kind of bookcases to make their way there. But that, of course, leads them up to the rats. And the rat fights in both cases scared the groups quite a bit because the swarms. Both groups had some people with some experience with Pathfinder 1st Edition. And in Pathfinder 1st Edition, rats are, pretty... rat swarms, at least, the swarms were kind of dangerous, right? Swarms in 1st Edition were pretty deadly customers and pretty hard to hurt. We softened them quite a bit in 2nd Edition. They're a lot easier to find ways to deal damage to. But both groups kind of were approaching the swarm with super caution. Just acting as if, the swarm was going to kill them. The fight itself, the way it's balanced out, is it's not a hard fight. It's, one rat swarm and 2 giant rats plus 1 additional giant rat for each character over 4. So both groups faced a rat swarm and 3 giant rats. That was not a very hard fight for them because the giant rats die pretty easy. They only, they have an AC of 15 and 8 hit points. So they go down pretty quick. The swarm itself is the bit of a bigger danger just because if you don't attack it with slashing or piercing, you have a real hard uphill climb. But everything else kind of works. In both cases, one group actually used alchemist fire on it. This was the group that nearly used the alchemist fire on the brown mold, but instead they used it on the rat swarm, and that almost killed it in one hit. Because it's, weak to area of effect and weak to splash damage. So it took a lot of damage real quickly. You had a lot of burning rats. The other group used electric arc on it. That worked pretty well and killed another giant rat. So, both groups used some spell power here to get rid of the rats. I believe there was even a Grim Tendrils thrown at the rat swarm. He's going to regret spending that later, actually, because I think he's gonna need that later. But gone now. Yeah. The rats scared the groups and caused a lot of panic. Like, the swarms do a really good job of causing the characters to panic and move apart from each other, which helps with the rat swarm, but makes it harder for healing or aid or ganging up on a monster. So, for both groups, the rats and the rat swarm fight was tricky. Both groups also looked at the passage into the sewer and were like, aha! Now we know a way that we can get in here without having to deal with the town council. Which is interesting, because both groups have automatically defaulted that the town council and the town guard are not their friends. Just because they're like, hey, yeah, no, we this is our ancient relic site, in the middle of our town. We want to make sure it's safe. And make sure that if there's anything in there of historical significance, we should keep it. And they may, in time, have reason not to trust some members of the town council. The town council is kind of a mixed lot. You've got a member of the nobles. In the nobles seat, there is a member of one of the larger logging houses in town. The religious seat is held by the aging cleric of Astramari, who frankly just agrees with the noble seat 9 times out of 10. And then you've got kind of the worker seat, which is a firebrand from a local woodworkers guild who kind of wants to change a lot of things. So, depending on how the player characters see themselves, if they're more aligned with nobility or, they certainly have an advocate for their wealth and prosperity. If they're more aligned with the workers, then, they certainly have someone who's a firebrand and looking for change. If they're more aligned with the religious orders, they find that they mostly have an ineffective leader who's more interested in taking a nap. So, but both groups have kind of automatically been like, well, we don't need the blue banners telling us what to do, right? So they've both got a pretty strong independent streak, which I think I'll lead into as we go forward. Honestly, the entire region and the campaign guide for the player's guide, it says that these sort of characters fit in up here, right? This kind of northern reach is filled with kind of independent folk who don't want to be part of Zankar, who don't want to be part of bigger, regions or anything like that. So, in that, they both play together. I had to be like, well, this goes into the sewers, but you don't know where. You've never explored the sewers. So it occurs to me that what I may end up having to do at some point in time is write a sewer excursion adventure. Or if the players do decide, hey, let's go try and make sure we've got a way down there on our own, right? I may have to write that as an addendum and maybe just make it an extra kind of bonus module content thing that in the final adventure can be included as, bonus content. Doesn't have to be huge, right? I don't need to write a giant 4-level sewer dungeon, right? Or anything like that. But I probably should make it interesting. So it occurs to me that I might want to build some sewer stuff. Now, I don't know that I really have much in the way of sewer tiles, but I'll have to take a peek. I bet you I have stuff that could do. Some of the dungeon stuff would certainly get me halfway there, maybe. I might want to do different wall pieces just to indicate it's... I don't know. I can figure that out. So both groups started looking around. Both groups have found a wand. Because there's a wand in that room. It's a wand of burning hands. And both groups have found, in the previous room, they found an old dwarven war axe display. That is one of the final war axes that came out of the dwarves when they still owned Skyhammer, the city of Skyhammer, which is now the seat of the Zankar Imperium. So a lot of this stuff is like, let me give you a piece of treasure with lore associated with it. I don't know that they appreciate it yet. They're just like, yeah, that's nice. How much is it worth? They'll get there. They'll get there. We're about at the point where both the groups kind of have gotten to. One group ended here. The other group pushed on just a hair further. But they got to the point where the shadow started stalking to them. And both groups noticed that when they were off dealing with the rats, they weren't paying attention. But I removed the symbol from the room down below. Because that's a separate piece, and I just pulled it out of the map. Suffice to say, both groups kind of freaked out when they realized that it was gone. And they were like, hey, wasn't there a symbol down there? We could have sworn there was a symbol. Where'd the symbol go? And I'm like, you don't know, it's gone. And they're like, oh, that's not a glitch? And I'm like, no, it's gone. It's not there because it's not there anymore. So both groups kind of freaked out and started panicking, and that's when I had both groups, one member of each group suddenly feel like they were being watched from the darkened recess of some of the bookshelves nearby. And so both groups are kind of weirded out by that, but they don't have much reason to think much else of it. Not yet, anyway, but I wanted to give them, it's the first step of foreshadowing before we go further down that particular road in the next encounter. So, both groups made it to that point. One group, the group I ran yesterday, did make it down into the laboratory itself and started taking a look around, started spreading out. They got some really basic description about what they were seeing in the room, and that's when the vat kind of split open and the green slime came out. I believe it was the bard in that group, the goblin bard in that group, who called out to Wolfren, hey, Wolfren, your tea is ready, and was, singing and trying to entice Wolfren to come out. Wolfren, of course, being nowhere nearby and unable to hear them, even if he was. But that noise was enough to trigger the ooze deciding, hey, there's an easy snack nearby. So yeah. Right now it's been fun. I think some of the intergroup dynamics are starting to grow in interesting ways. Both groups have started forming a line up to the healer. So that's going to happen, especially after a fight. There's a whole lot of like, well, I get in line, right? And while they're doing that, because both groups really only have one person who's reliably good at medicine and a couple folks who are kind of So I think it's a lesson they're going to learn the hard way here soon. I got to be honest. I think both groups have a potential for losing a character sometime here in the near future, because they're going to run into some harder fights, and frankly some of their group composition isn't going to cut it. One group doesn't really have a big fightery character, right? They've got a rogue and a war priest. Not gonna quite cut it. A rogue and a war priest, and then you've got a penumbrist, a bard, and a sorcerer. And you got 2 occult spellcasters, an arcane spellcaster, a divine spellcaster, and a rogue. That's going to get them into trouble. They're going to get into trouble sooner rather than later. And I don't know who's going to get it. But I worry for the war priest and the rogue, because they're going to try and hold things off. But I don't think they have the staying power. They don't have enough hit points, and their AC isn't quite what it needs to be. The rogue is fine, but still. It's one of those things where you get hit and you need hit points to soak. And, when I don't think anybody in that group has over 20. And I mean, yeah, they're still first level, but yeah, they're either going to have to find a way to bulk up or, use some tactics that are going to save them, right? I just don't think they're there yet. So we'll have to see how it goes. The other group at least has a barbarian that is trained to murder. But outside of that barbarian, they don't have a lot of great support. They got a rogue in that group as well. So barbarian and rogue, not bad. But beyond that, then, you've got you've got another alchemist and a penumbrist and I believe another bard. A bard. Yeah, there's 2 bards in the groups. So, we'll see how it goes. I think the inter-party dynamics have started to kind of firm up nicely. As far as characters go, they've started to. In one group, we've got kind of in the Monday night group, we've got a goblin bard who is like a rejected noble, and desperately wants to return to being a noble. So is wearing like a suit down in this dungeon. Bad idea. Keeps getting ripped up and soiled and stuff, and he has to keep fixing it. So there's that. And him and the Gloamling rogue are. It's not 2 bards in one party, to be clear. It's they're in different parties. It's not quite that bad. And then you've got this awkward Gloamling rogue. Who's, and they're adventuring with a broody penumbrist who gets restless, arcane dragon-blooded sorceress, and a war priest cleric, and they're a motley crew. I don't know how they're going to succeed, but they're going to give it their all. That's for sure. Let me see here. I'm just trying. Okay, yeah. So definitely a barbarian. The other group has a barbarian. Why am I spacing? Yeah. Two goblin bards. Both group have a goblin bard. A rogue. All right. Yeah, that's it. Both groups have a goblin bard. One is much more of a prankster and kind of a con artist. The other one is like wants to be the court magician or court performance goblin, I guess. So one is highborn and one is definitely the opposite. The 2 characters might be the same in terms of some of their base choices, but they could not be more different. So there's that. it does make it so that I'm not going to ever mix these groups together, because if I end up with 2 goblin bards at one table, I don't think the game engine can handle that level of hilarity. So many goblins are goblin songs. Yeah, no, it's true. So where am I at? Both groups are kind of in. It is interesting to me how much they have certain parallelism. Both groups don't trust the city. They don't trust the council. They tried to weasel their way in here, back into the dungeon to ensure that they didn't have to face any competition. Both groups have an inherent kind of independence and greed to them. And I think that's just an adventurer thing in general. And folks, who are newer to the game, because both groups have some newer players, get, kind of protective of things. It's easy to distrust everyone that I am playing, right? Because I am the voice of chaos. So it certainly feels like that's kind of what's going on. Yeah, and I mean they're facing the same encounters and stuff, so a lot of that stuff resolves in similar ways. I think in some groups, the Monday night group certainly had to deal with me rolling better than the Thursday night group did, because that cave fisher grabbed hold of the sorcerer and pulled her off into the corner, knocked her out with one claw, and was about to reel her up into its nest to eat her, before they finally managed to kill it with a well-placed telekinetic projectile. I think throwing an old book at it, making a crab po' boy, I think is what they were saying they were going to do with it. But yeah, it's been fun, and I've certainly learned a lot. I don't think so far the second floor hasn't had as many lessons as the first floor. In the first floor, there were certainly encounters that was like, oh, this one just isn't quite working the way I want it to. Both of these encounters, the 2 encounters we've had so far, have worked kind of precisely as planned. The Cave Fisher was meant to be scary, but it ultimately is kind of once you manage to crack it, pardon the pun, it goes down pretty easy. And the rats in the rat swarm are, they look scary at first, but they evaporate the moment you put much resistance up against them. They come apart. Right, the giant rats die real easy, and the rat swarm isn't as tough as it wasn't. So I'm not really seeing a lot I want to change there. I do think there is a little bit of slow pacing at the start of this one, just because you kind of get this lore dump at first. But seeing as this is actually, the second floor of the dungeon, I don't really feel as bad putting some of the lore in here. There is part of me that is thinking maybe I should move some of the displays. But torn on that. I do like having them all in the first room so that you can kind of examine them and not just kind of skip over them or discard them, because it's the only real thing to do that and avoid the kind of symbol in that first room. So, boy, tired today. Stayed up too late. So yeah, that's kind of where we're at right now. As far as where we're going, I think both parties will probably wrap up the dungeon in their next session. So I think I'm, the next session isn't until next Thursday and then the following Monday. So I'm like 2 weeks away from being done with this part and having all the feedback I need, which is good, because that means it'll be done here in June, and folks will get that part here very soon. So my planning is already starting to turn on to part 2 of Wolfren's Fate, to get that spun up. This is the part where they need to find out where they can find a copy of Wolfren's ring, his signet ring. And it's currently written as really just kind of a city exploration part, but it doesn't have much in the way of meat to it yet. And I think the way that that's going to play out is that some of the folks who have information for you are going to be less willing to give it to you unless you help them out with certain problems, right? So, you can go to the sky gazer in the place that Wolfren used to visit with some frequency. And you can learn that he had a box of things there, but it was picked up by a relative. But maybe they don't tell you that unless you help them, clear out the basement or something like that, right? Oh yeah, no, we have records like that. It's down in the basement. But I'd be careful down there. We've been having troubles, right? There's some sort of monster down in the basement. It's not a big deal. Just don't go down into the back corner. But the records are probably down there, right? It'll be that sort of thing. Wherein it's city exploration, but also other things happen along the way, right? So the shop that had all the old curios and stuff that has some of the information, they may be able to get that, but the owner needs some help with the thing, and some of it may be optional, some of it may be mandatory. I suspect my players will dive at even the optional stuff and help folks out and do things, because both of them are eager to prove themselves. So, and then there is the other side plot of what happened to Greyfawn Nimblebrow and what's going on there. Now, the truth is, there is a secretive group of folks who don't want anyone digging into Wolfren's tower or what Wolfren was into, and they are going to try and start pick off anyone who continues this line of exploration, including the piece. So what's going to happen is there are going to be unsavory elements that come looking for the player characters at some point during part 2 to put an end to their exploration. It'll probably be something light at first. It'll be like some local cutthroats or bandits who were hired to specifically target the player character, right? And make it look like a robbery or something. But if beaten in question, they will quickly come clean that they were actually hired to do this, and it wasn't about the coin that the players have on them, although it looks that way at first blush. So I think that's how part 2 is going to come together. Now, the tricky part about part 2 is that I probably have to write most of it in advance, which means I need to get this part 1 bit done here ASAP, because until I, have a lot of part 2 done, I can't run it. I can run it off notes and stuff, and I may end up having to do that just to keep my players going. But yeah, part 2 is going to have to be, because they can kind of go anywhere, I'm going to have most of it put into place before the players can experience it. Now, I think what it's going to be is a series of adventure nodes, and the players get to just choose the order in which they interact with them. And at some point in time during this, they'll undoubtedly also hit second level. I'm looking at my XP math, and at the end of the first floor, the players were at about halfway, roughly, to second level. Now, depending on how much of a story XP and how much combats they got, I think we're already probably pretty close. I may actually try and nudge it with some story XP and some other stuff to see if I can't get the players all the way to second level at the end of part 1, but it may take into part 2 is my current thinking, is that they're going to be like 100 or 200 short. But a shadowy organization, yes, indeed. So there's some folks out there who do not want anything to do with Wolfren's old research explored, and people digging into his old tower immediately triggers draws their attention. So that should be fun and dangerous. But here we are. I've been rambling for 40 minutes. I think that's where we're at. I think we're a good solid 2 weeks away from my players being done entirely with part 1 of Wolfren's Fate. Grand total, that means they will have played 6 sessions or about 18 hours to get through this. I'm going to wager a group of experienced Pathfinder players, if everyone in the group is experienced, you could probably get through the content in significantly less time. I think some of the fights and stuff would go a lot faster. But that said, right, we're also playing at home, we're off camera and stuff like that. We're not being broadcast or anything. But people make jokes, and sometimes we get lost talking about something. I'm pretty good about keeping them on track, so I think in grand total we're probably, your group probably won't take 18 hours, but it wouldn't surprise me if they easily take 15. So that's pretty good for the first part of the adventure, and then we'll move into part 2. And Part 2 is going to be interesting just because it is kind of open-ended city exploration. Part 3 is the one that I'm pretty excited for because it involves a journey and an adventure at the end of that journey. That's at least a little linear, so it'll be easier for me to put together. And then we come back to Wormbone for Part 4, which is, the final exploration of under Wolfren's Tower and of Wolfren from his 300-year nap. So, fun. Coming together nicely. I'm pretty happy with how it's coming together. I hope you are as well. I definitely want to get more of it out to folks. I know that the rate that I'm playing and playtesting this is actually probably too slow for folks to start playing with it alongside me because you'd run out of content before I can get it to you. Because as it turns out, writing this stuff and fully playtesting it can take a while. Adventures that you don't playtest, you can get done a lot faster. Trust me, I've done it before. But this one's got enough playtesting in it that this is moving along at a little bit of a slow pace for folks who want to parallel to me. If you're running it every 2 weeks for only a couple hours, you'd probably keep it. Especially if you don't start until have all of part 1. There we go. I think I'll open it up here to a little bit of questions. We got, maybe 5 minutes or maybe 5 to 10 minutes here before I swap out and get ready for my Twitch stream. Let's see. I've got a question. How excited am I when you're done with part 1? I'm pretty excited. It's the first real kind of large content piece for this. The player's guide was the first thing I actually finished and kind of delivered to all of you, but it's in website form right now. I do have a laid out version of that, but it's pretty light and sketchy, and I wouldn't call it done. And there's still some content I want to add to it. The problem is that document is huge. It's 58 pages right now, and it doesn't have much in the way of art. Speaking of art, I have to draw a map of Wormbone. Right now, all I've got is a kind of sketch, and that's not sufficient. So I've got to draw a full map of Wormbone sometime in the next couple weeks. Which reminds me, I'm taking Friday off, so maybe I'll work on the map of Wormbone. That's one thing that I got to get done here sooner rather than later, because both of my groups are going to need it, and I'm going to need it as well. So that we're getting pretty close on that. I got to spend some time mapping, which is good because I like drawing. So maybe I'll. If I feel up to it and I feel presentable, maybe I'll throw up a live stream Friday of just drawing the Wormbone map. I don't know if folks are interested. I don't. We'll see. I may also feel like just being a goblin and drawing in my pajamas. So is it going at a spicy pace? Yeah. I mean, I guess. I think the next couple encounters are going to be real interesting because they're getting to the hardest fights in part 1. The slime and ooze can be a hard fight. The thing that I'm really worried about is the Shadow Hunter. The Shadow Hunter is a dangerous creature that will probably crit people and take someone down pretty quickly. And it's probably going to be trying to drag someone away off into the darkness when the players are going to have to find a way to lighten the area and get it to flee. Let's see. Of the stuff that was needed tweaking during the playtest, what change was the most surprising? The thing that took me off guard on both groups was the fact that both of them tried to stay in the tower or not tell the townsfolk what they found. Like, both groups were immediately distrusting of that entire process. And I'm not entirely sure why, but it was easily solved by adding a time limit to their exploration and being like, yeah, you can go in there for 8 hours. If you're not out in 8 hours, we're sending a team in after you. Because that gives it a definitive end. In this case, that's going to make it a bit cleaner on that front. They might not want to tell them about the second floor, but the Lieutenant Havanok, which is the person who's questioning them, won't let them back in without this. So then they either have to get in through subterfuge or they have to find a different way in. And Both of those are possible, but they're kind of challenges. So I don't know if players will do that or not, but we'll see. Yeah, I don't know what it is. There's something about player characters not wanting to be like, well, we don't want to leave the adventure. They might not let us back in, and that thought is something I may want to squash with a bit of box text. That's just like, hey, listen, you only have 8 hours today. If you need to go back in tomorrow, we'll let you back in, right? Something like that isn't so demanding, right? Because right now there's kind of this weird thought of like it's like a theme park and they only have a ticket for one day, and I don't quite get that. Do I randomly select victims or roll for them? Actually, to be honest, I let the players kind of decide it for me. Especially when it comes to the Shadowhunter attack. It's going to attack whatever player is kind of off on their own. That's it. Yeah. Players don't trust authority. I mean, that's no surprises there, right? I mean, I don't know. So yeah, anyway, when it comes to the Shadowhunter, it's going to attack whoever is kind of off on their lonesome. I don't think that'll make it too difficult, to be honest. My players tend to kind of cluster together. If they're all clustered together, it'll be whoever's in the back, right? But it's going to happen right when they try and leave this room. So it's after the slime fight, after they solve the puzzle and the doors become unlocked, and they can then leave the room. Once that happens, that's when it attacks. It attacks as they're trying to leave the room and go and explore other things. Because at that point in time, all that's left is kind of wrap up of them going, exploring stuff, finding stuff, and then opening the way down below. Now, one thing I've also decided is in Wolfren's reagent supply, he's going to have kind of ensorcelled iron, which can be used to make magic weapons. So one thing that I'm kind of playing around with in the world right now, so there's this... describe this really briefly here. There's a system, there's the levels of magic in the world, and if magic is too weak, you can't cast spells of that sort there. And for a while I was playing around with being like, oh yeah, and some magic items don't work, and I was like, oh god, the more I dug into that, I'm like, the system does not support. So the way I'm going to be recasting that. The way it works is that magic items don't work if you're in the worst zone and they're of that type. So if you definitely don't want to be in a place where there's basically no arcane magic, because then most magic items won't work. That makes sense. But in all the other levels, the magic item works as normal. However, creation is a problem. You cannot create magic items without having either a magical workshop that allows you to work in such things, or magical ingredients, or magically charged ingredients need to be made. So it adds an extra layer on the creation process, which I think actually plays better to the story of the world. And that also made me realize that then I could give out magical crafting ingredients as treasure. So what's going to happen is they are going to find a small supply of this kind of spell ensorcelled, magic ensorcelled iron, and be able to take that back upstairs and give that to Ingot, where they will be able to get some magic weapons crafted. And I think I'll probably give them enough for 2+1 items at the end of part 1. So they didn't find magic weapons. They found the raw ingredients to get the magic weapons that they want. So that's going to be probably their big reward for the end of this, is this one piece of treasure. Because that's going to be a pretty big deal for some of the characters in the group. And I may do it based on handedness or bulk. Like I may be like, hey, listen, you got 4 bulk worth of magic iron, so you can make 4 bulk worth of weapons. But I have to be careful with that, because lights count is 1/10. So, I'll be like, oh, great, we're going to make a whole bunch, but they'll still have to pay for the process. So, I don't know. We'll see. I need to figure out how that's going to work. Because by necessity, if I give them enough to make a longsword, they could instead make 10 short swords. That's a problem. I'm going to need to think about that a little. All right. Well, there we are, everybody. I think that about wraps it up here for this week. We got new credits here. This is the first stream of June. So these are brand new credits in that they are updated for the most recent Patreon roll. So thank you for watching, everybody. Our next stream will be this coming Saturday. This Saturday we'll be doing a Secrets of Eventide stream for those of the Lord and Master tier. Not quite sure what the theme's going to be. Might be, you know, some deeper kind of lore and things going forward. I don't know. I'm going to give it some thought. I'll announce it via the Patreon here in the coming days. So, but that'll be this Saturday at 3 p.m. So tune in. Thank you for watching, everybody. Have yourself a great rest of your weekend. I'll be on Twitch here in just a few. Talk to you later, everybody.